Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 24 team selection. It's a pretty big game week because you're 2 game weeks out here from a potential double Game Week 26, and the information will come in terms of the prospective announcement, I think, around Thursday and Friday this week. So whilst I think it's quite clear what the general path or move order is, you do also kind of want to maybe be open to the idea that Chelsea could upset, for example, in the FL Cup, things like that, and that could change your mind in terms of transfers. At the same time, I would also say it's quite likely that Arsenal are going to secure that double Game Week 26 if the provisional announcements are to go the way that we think. And regardless, right, you're probably still triple invested into Arsenal or wild carding and going to do that anyways, or you're invested into Chelsea as well and trying to increase that level of investment this week. And it could not be Chelsea. It might even be, for example, more United, more Aston Villa. But I've decided to be pretty aggressive this game week on the assumption that, as I said, I think Arsenal will progress. I think Chelsea have amazing fixtures. And of course, if they have double game 26, that's, extra icing on the cake. Champions League has also concluded. So a lot of teams within the Premier League have already advanced into the top 8, except for Newcastle. And the impact of that, of course, is, more fixture pileup for a team like Newcastle and more rotation probably for a team like that compared to some of the other teams. So I think even picks like, for example, Palmer, who I think the tricky thing with him, of course, with the amount of injuries that he's had is just the lack of match fitness. And, of course, that kind of brings on potential other injuries as well if he's overplaying and, still dealing with that sort of groin issue. But Chelsea played reasonably well versus Napoli. I think they didn't line up the best, and then Chalobah came on and Palmer came on, and then João Pedro also just had a great game as well. So nice little sort of Champions League adventure there. Has it changed my moves? No, because I already made them. And we'll jump into my team section in a moment. In terms of recapping Game Week 23, I didn't have the best of game weeks, but I fortunately had a green, and that's all I can ask for, right? After 5 reds in a row from the position that I was at a couple of weeks ago, it's really nice to have, some solid, steady greens that can kind of sort of bring back the rank up a little bit, so up, and, we're at top 29k right now. We actually played O'Reilly last week and decided to keep him. So I took one price fall for O'Reilly, but I have now sold him. I can declare that now in this video. Not because I think O'Reilly's going to lose massive minutes. In fact, I think the fact that he can actually play a mixture of the 6 and is probably still the first choice left back of the team means he's very good. I just don't really like City's fixtures, and he's still someone who, despite sort of being close to getting DEFCON, is not someone you consistently look at as an option to get DEFCON. So at that point, it's a case of, do you want to own a City defender who is reasonably nailed and then kind of bank on the clean sheets that City have, or do you want to move into some other teams where maybe there's more routes towards points from certain players? And something that I'll probably add about O'Reilly is I think there was a stage in the season, early in the season, where the data was exceptional, where he was actually the best or sort of highest performing fullback at some point in time in terms of the numbers. And I think part of that is maybe a shift in role and also fixture pileup for himself, which has seen that those numbers regress a little bit. And of course, a mixture of playing, other positions will have impacted some of his numbers. So he's no longer, for example, the most prolific attacker in terms of underlying stats, but I think he's still, from what I believe, a top 5 defender in terms of the numbers that he's racked up this season. So it is a bit of a pity that he's out or been outscored by Matheus Nunes so convincingly. And to be fair, credit to people who went for Matheus Nunes and went against the grain, to be fair. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about my team. Arsenal, it's kind of like a reluctant hold, and I don't feel too bad about it. When everyone's effective ownership is so high across Arsenal and they're so sort of, seeped into, let's say, tripling up on Arsenal, that's not exactly the type of game that I look forward to every week, but I did try to look forward to Saka captain because, of course, the Haaland leak came out before the deadline. We were able to react to that on live stream. So, of course, if you're watching this week and you're interested, follow the live stream. We'll always react to leaks where possible. And that kind of left me playing Haaland still over Krupi, because I still thought there was a chance that maybe City could play really poorly, and Marmoush has not really been, fresh of minutes as of late. So I kind of thought there's still a chance if City played really poorly that Haaland could maybe come on at halftime and things could happen. So he did not do that, but Krupi Jr. also played very minimal minutes versus Liverpool. A 1 point versus 1 point I don't feel too bad about. Richards was at the back of the bench, and he always was going to be. So no regrets there. Mukele got another assist, so back-to-back assists is quite impressive. A really good cross to Brian Bobby's head. But yeah, I felt quite comfortable about the fact that I made the Bruno move the week previous in Game Week 22, because if I had gone for, let's say, a Tavernier path, sure, I would have gotten the Virgil goal this week, but I think I'd be forcing transfers towards Bruno, and I'm not really sure sort of what state my team would have been in. And I've also sold Foden as of now. But actually, ironically, I think the Doku injury in the Champions League means that it kind of bolsters everyone else's minutes, right? With Doku being out, that's another option on the left gone. That means Semenyo's minutes, I think, are even more nailed for now. For Cherki and Foden, I think that just gives them arguably one more spot to kind of fill in the team at any point in time. Because if you're thinking that, I guess like Cherki is someone who could play in the middle, which still sort of remains to be seen when Semenyo plays. I don't think that's really the case, but that's still at least a position on the pitch, for example, where Foden could, for example, play central, Semenyo can play on the left, and then Cherki can play out wide on the right. That is a very feasible lineup that City could play that could incorporate all of them. Now, I think Foden's lack of performance probably means that Reiner's can actually play more minutes in the middle, and then Bernardo's there too. So to me, I still think Foden's someone that I'm not very interested in. But for people owning Cherki, people who have gone into Semenyo, I think you've probably actually won out here, and I think you've done really well. So congrats there. Sobo and holding Sobo, I think has worked out really well. To be honest, I think, as I've always said, within sort of routes towards points in terms of the cheat sheet, when you own someone like Sobo, you kind of know that a lot of the routes towards points are from action sort of off the pitch in terms of, or not off the pitch, but rather sort of not from open play. And so sometimes there are game weeks where you get these kind of like things lining up perfectly, where, for example, he can get set piece assists and then, of course, score a goal from a free kick. I think the reverse almost happened in the Champions League match versus Karabag, where Salah actually sort of got the ball rolling from Sobo, so Sobo got the assist, and then Salah scored a great free kick. These things can happen going forwards, and so I think Sobo still having almost perfect minutes within the Premier League, where Liverpool are still, playing as seriously as possible, is why I still like keeping Sobo on the team. With Lefay, he's almost like a bit more of a diminished version of that, but he probably has penalties, and so far we've seen him play one match without Granit Xhaka on the pitch. I didn't really like the positioning. I think it's much worse. We did sort of buy him because we were thinking he'd be playing a little bit more advanced from here on out, and I think we've enjoyed one match of that so far because we also missed a penalty in a previous game. But I'm looking forward to Burnley at home, and this might be the swan song for Lefay, and I'll talk about why in a moment. Osaka and captaincy, I can't feel too bad because most options were poor. Sure, I could have considered Foden to Semenyo, and now that transfer, I think in hindsight, as I said, with the Doku injury, looks much, much better. But there's also the blank Gameweek 31 to think about, especially with City having the advantage that they have within the EFL Cup. So that's that, and a multitude of other things kind of led me towards sort of swerving Semenyo. I wanted 2 free chances for this week, and I've used them. So that's it for my team. I think having bench helps in this stage of the season, where if you're pushing early on moves, the positive of having a bench and depth, like for example, Krupi Jr. and Richards this week, is that it can't go that horribly wrong for the team. So say you have one injury and you might not have the free transfer to address it. I still have really good backup this week with Krupi Jr. versus Wolves away, and then Richards versus Nottingham Forest away. So that's my team in Gaming 23. Let's just quickly jump into the kind of stats for this game week here from a team perspective and look at some of the match day odds from 11to5.com. So for this week, I would say that it's going to be interesting because, as I said, Aston Villa, United, and Chelsea, generally speaking, have a really good fixture run now. And it starts with, Aston Villa. And they're a team that I've probably ignored a little bit, to be quite honest. But I think also having the chance to go towards United is quite exciting, or to go towards Chelsea, who simply have a better game as well. So I think you can have multiple routes towards success now. Some of the Villa players could be a little bit more expensive, if we want to be honest, whereas some of the United players are a bit cheaper outside of Bruno. And with Chelsea, I think you can make the same argument for anyone really within the Chelsea team outside of Palmer. So that's kind of how I feel about these games. Highest goal scoring odds go towards Chelsea, which is no surprise just given West Ham's defense this season. There's a great game for Sunderland here and Burnley, so probably one of the highest projected goals you'll ever see for Sunderland this season. So if you're remotely invested in Sunderland in any way possible, I think you should feel happy about this. Otherwise, Bournemouth actually are a team that I haven't mentioned yet, but they're about to start a fixture run. Wolves have actually looked pretty respectable as of late. I think from a defense point of view, we've kind of mentioned that from an underlying stats perspective that they've always been quite decent compared to, let's say, a Burnley or a West Ham. But this is still a really good fixture run for Bournemouth. And I think to give credit towards Bournemouth, they've just been a stellar attack all season long. It's just the defense that has really moved wayward. So as we kind of embark on this run for Bournemouth, I've been recommending players like Evan Nilsson on the wild card, for example, and I think he does make quite a bit of sense for anyone who's kind of shopping for that sort of luxury transfer. At the same time, you look across the board, and someone like João Pedro's, in exceptional form right now, and he could still be also one to target for the Chelsea team. But there's such a big fixture pilot for Chelsea. That's kind of my concern, where I'm not sure if his minutes will be perfect over this run, at least for around this West Ham game potentially. So the last thing that I'd mention is, once again, great clean sheet odds for Arsenal, decent for Brighton here, decent for Chelsea. Otherwise, I think what we're starting to generally see is, of course, the Newcastle run starting to get a touch worse. Palace will be interesting in a few weeks' time, but not yet. And City, of course, this is an away match versus Spurs, they're sort of bogey team, but we're expecting City to score goals, but not very high clean sheet odds. And I think this, generally speaking, is the start of a pretty poor City run just from a fixtures perspective. So that's the reflection of that. My takeaways for this week is that I think you can just pick 2 or 3 players from the teams that we've sort of mentioned, and I think you'll do well. We're kind of at a spot in FPL where I don't think that you're forced to go for what I would call essential-ish players, because there's no one who really looks essential. A lot of the expensive players are not really living up to their value, whether it's minutes or whether it's performance or whether it's underlying stats. So you can really go wherever you want, and I think you can plug and play a couple of players as long as they fit within your team. And to be honest, if we think Liverpool are going to play reasonably well within the Premier League, which remains to be seen, in a few weeks' time, Liverpool will also be quite interesting. So whilst they've completely flopped as of late with games like Wolves at home and Burnley at home, we can definitely revisit them. Although, of course, Wirtz is someone who's actually done well. So congratulations to people who have continued to hold him and own a really good pick. And that's pretty much it. So when it comes to my team and my decisions, I've made a defensive transfer as well as a midfield transfer. Part of the reason why I didn't do a double midfield transfer, and I think, initially quite keen on doing it, is because at the end of the day, I have Lefay, and I actually think Sobo is a pretty good hold. Maybe I'm overreacting to Sobo finally getting a haul in FPL, but I think that haul is kind of a justification of the reasoning for why we own someone like Sobo, or why we like anyone who's kind of that sort of, centre mid / slightly more deeper playing midfielder who can get, set piece assists, who can get free kick goals, who can get potential penalty share at some points in time. I think Salah actually sort of reasserting himself back into the team and finding perfect minutes basically since he's come back from AFCON is not a positive for Sobo. But maybe if the team's levels and performance levels increase, and for example, the attack actually looks to be improved, then of course I think we can enjoy Sobo a little bit more as an FPL pick. So what I've done this week is I've actually done a very aggressive move to actually do Nico O'Reilly to Maguire. And I did this before Nico O'Reilly got a price drop from 5.1 million to 5.0. Shared that sort of update with the members channel as well. So if you're interested in sort of following my moves, sometimes I tend to, if I don't have the time to make a team selection video after a move, or, like for example, in the transfer plans video, I actually shared my Enzo move before he actually sort of rose in price. Sometimes there's obviously times where I make transfers on odd times where I can't record or can't sort of speak about it, other than on Twitter, where you can follow me there too. But yeah, members do get access to that. And I did make O'Reilly to Maguire a reality. I think this can end up being, a very, very poor move. I completely recognize that there's a lot of depth for United as a team. Now, De Ligt still seems to be a couple of weeks out per Carrick's latest comments on him, but there's still plenty Euro in the team, and he's obviously a player that I think, from the United hierarchy, it seems like that they would rather, let's say, Carrick develop some of the younger players. But I think from a performance standpoint, I almost have to kind of trust my gut here. I think that United is kind of core towards the team. The league is, a set piece league, as we kind of know. Maguire is one of the best set piece kind of receivers within the league. And I'm hoping that I can benefit from someone at 4.3 million who looks reasonably nailed for now, at least until De Ligt is back. So that's kind of why I've moved towards Maguire. He can get injured, and United's fixtures do fall off a little bit, especially from a defensive point of view. But in the interim, I'm hoping to get as many Maguire minutes as possible. So I will be fielding him this week alongside Gabriel and Raya, of course. A bit of an obvious play versus Leeds away. Not saying that Leeds are an easy fixture at all. I don't think they are. I think from all the promoted teams, we can easily say that they've comfortably been the best offense when you look at underlying stats. And that doesn't mean that this is a good game for Arsenal. But of course, Arsenal, with the level of defense that they are, I guess, when they actually play their full first string team and not, for example, the B team versus Kairat, should be looking to get a pretty good chance of getting a clean sheet here. And then I'm really excited to play Mukiele versus Burnley at home. I think there was possibly a world where I would have gone maybe an Alderete or a Dan Ballard for a week like this, but I didn't really have too much interest in sort of buying into Sunderland's future fixtures too much. I kind of think that with the potential appeal of Maguire, it's almost like saying, if I can get away with it, Maguire could be a much better pick than maybe owning some of the other Sunderland defenders for future fixtures, where I think the fixture run's honestly quite mediocre. This is almost the last good Sunderland fixture, I would say, for a bit. And that's how I feel about my team. So in the midfield, I've decided to also make another move. And you'll notice that one player is missing. Bryan Mbeumo is missing. And part of this is because I've decided to make moves in a specific order so that I can get to Bryan Mbeumo still, but still maximize in the short term. So what have I done? I've done Foden to Enzo, to bank in West Ham at home. I feel like that's a better game for Chelsea than it is a better game for United. Is Mbumo a much more interesting pick than Enzo? I would definitely say so, right? So if you kind of look from the perspective of Mbumo's positioning, the Dorgu minutes, I think, probably going to be reallocated amongst all the existing United players and maybe a little bit of Sesko. I would like a little bit more information with Mbumo, but I don't think that the Dorgu injury, you know, would even change my mind too much on Mbumo. I think he was always going to be a good pick, but I really like the idea of being able to take Lefay out of my team for Mbumo. Whereas I was a little bit more hesitant actually to take Sob out of my team for Mbumo. So I've devised a way to do so, which is why I've done Nico Riley down to Maguire, which has saved me around 0.8 million in terms of sell value. And then also the Foden to Enzo move, which has given me enough money in the bank where right now, as things stand, I've got 0.2 million in the coffer sort of to be able to kind of stretch towards Mbumo. So I think Mbumo will probably increase in price one more time before the deadline. I can't do anything about that. I don't plan on taking a hit. This is Lefay versus Burnley, but the plan is to do Lefay to Mbumo next week. So right now I'll have Enzo versus West Ham at home, Sobo versus Newcastle at home. Nice to have a home game there. Lefay versus Burnley at home, which is hopefully the banker. Bruno versus Fulham at home, and Saka versus Leeds away. Now, every week I almost get a question in terms of, hey, can you admit that Saka is worse than Rice, or when are you going to move Saka to Rice? And I think as I've sort of responded every week, until there's a really good reason for me to save 3 million in the bank in my team, I'm probably going to just keep Saka now. It's not something that I enjoy. It's not like I particularly enjoy the Saka experience over Rice. I'm kind of stuck with him. So if Saka wants to get finally some goals and assists, he would be my guest. And I'm looking forward to that. But, don't hold me to it as a Rice owner. Enjoy Rice for what it is. And, I'll sit here with Saka and my occasional benchings and hope for the best. As far as Bruno, though, and Enzo, I think they're the firm captaincy options. In the front line, I'm actually going Ekitike and Haaland. It's nice that Ekitike and Sobo were actually subbed off a little bit earlier versus Karabag. Of course, they kind of secured a result that was, a huge result in terms of goal deficit, but that didn't matter because Real Madrid were busy losing to Benfica. So Liverpool were comfortably in the top 8 and in the third position with the sort of, a pretty good seeding, because I think, last season Liverpool kind of struggled from the perspective of losing their seeding, and then that kind of led to them playing PSG in terms of sort of finishing first within the groups. But this time around, they've probably secured the best finish that they possibly could have, when you kind of consider how good Arsenal and Bayern's results were and how poor Liverpool's season has been in the most part outside of the Champions League. So yeah, I think Liverpool, I wouldn't say they're kind of on an upwards trend here. It's hard to say that because I think when you watch them in Champions League, you really notice how much of a gap there is versus the Premier League. And then, Karabag, of course, is like not really a good example either, nor is Marseille. I mean, Marseille also, I think, I got completely squashed, this week in match day 8, but that's not the point. The point that I'm trying to make is that, okay, when you watch these good Champions League performances from Liverpool, I don't think that's really any indication of things getting better for this Liverpool team. For the most part, I think when you still watch them in the Premier League, there's been a lot of like poor performances and kind of dour performances, or even, for example, Ekitike getting benched, which, people aren't happy with, myself included. But it is what it is. So I'm going to keep Sobo and Ekitike here. As I said, it's nice that they got rested. I don't have any concerns about starting them over Junior Krupi. I feel like Krupi's kind of at a state where his substitutions are around the 65 to 70 minute mark. I wouldn't really stretch beyond that. And of course, Ryan has joined the club, but I think he's probably going to be utilized more on the right-hand side for now. As I said with Krupi, I think he's got a good game here, but I do really value minutes in football, and I do think Sobo and Ekitike are going to get really good minutes within this match versus Newcastle. It's a very important game. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I almost think that it's correct to play that. I'm also backing kind of, I guess, a Liverpool result here by playing 2 Liverpool players as opposed to benching one of the Liverpool players and then playing Krupi over them. It's always nice to have a first good auto sub as well, just in case anything goes wrong. In terms of captaincy, though, this week, I think I'm going to play Bruno as the captain, Enzo as the vice. I feel like Palmer coming off the bench versus Napoli and playing 45 minutes, the 245 minutes, actually seeing him getting 2 assists, probably lends me to thinking that he could be available to start versus West Ham. So we're realistically saying maybe if Enzo starts, and he should, hopefully, really upset if he didn't, but should Enzo start, I think it's more likely that he's only going to get pen share for around maybe like 30, 35 minutes of the game, because I think you could probably see a Cole Palmer start and then maybe a substitution a little bit earlier, as he kind of also needs to get ready to play potentially a very important Arsenal match in the AFL Cup second leg. So I feel like, is that enough to kind of push me over the edge in terms of going Enzo over Bruno? Probably not, to be honest. I think Bruno just has a lot more roots towards points. It just comes down to sort of being the main set piece talisman, whereas Enzo, I think at times, is kind of deputy to a couple players, including Reece James. But Reece James obviously playing minutes versus Napoli will change that too, and that dynamic. But yeah, I like Bruno for that reason. I think Bruno's had, exceptional numbers. He's obviously in really good attacking positions now, starting to get, still consistent def con. So I don't think that argument's gone. So yeah, I'll be going with Bruno as a captaincy for now. If there's, for example, news or reporting on Palmer, and we get an inkling that potentially Palmer might not be even included in the West Ham game, which I kind of doubt now at this point, maybe I'll switch towards an Enzo captaincy. But I'm quite happy with the Bruno captaincy. It's arguably safe, but I just like it because Bruno is, one of the more consistent performers within the game. And when I kind of look at Enzo, for example, in the last two matches where he's actually scored back-to-back penalty goals, I kind of think about, all the actions that I've seen him within the last two games, and then just think he's not been that exhilarating, right? Whereas Bruno still, for the most part, outside of, let's say, the Arsenal match, has been very, very exciting. So that's kind of how I feel about my team. Bench order is going to be Dubravka, Krupi, Richards, and Anderson. I don't think there's too much to really kind of iterate there. I'm clearly sort of backing a United result here, so I have Anderson back on the bench. Richards, I think, is a really good auto sub for players. If I get an auto sub from Maguire, let's not even talk about it. It would have been, and it will go down as a bad move, but I guess it would have enabled Mbumo. And Krupi Jr., as I said, is good auto sub from an attacking position. So that's going to be my team selection. I'm actually really looking forward to hopefully being able to go unscathed with this team into Game Week 25. There's also, as I said, going to be a potential provisional announcement in Game Week 20, or, at the end of this week here on Thursday or Friday. And that could confirm a potential double Game Week 26 for, the winner of Arsenal versus Chelsea in the EFL Cup. So let's stay tuned towards that. If you don't need to make moves, for price reasons, then of course wait for that, and maybe even consider, for example, rolling towards the next week if you feel like your team is in good shape. Because I can probably say that I've seen other teams with Enzo and Mbumo already, and potentially you're in a better position than myself. So you don't necessarily need to make transfers this week. I think I'm making transfers because my team is maybe a little bit behind the field, depending on how City performs. Foden and O'Reilly can still turn good, but I just like the idea of sort of shipping them off on what was kind of a low, right? I would love to have said that Wolves at home was a high. I suppose for Nico O'Reilly, 6 points is a high, but it is what it is. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Best of luck this game week in Game 24, and take care and goodbye.